everyone, this is Emily Jane Acree.
And Adam Price.
And you're listening to the Relative Rhythms Podcast. Today we are excited to introduce to you folk musician, singer-songwriter, banjo player, percussive dancer, and choreographer Evie Ladin.
Evie is a prolific songwriter and trad musician. She has released 5 albums with her group, the Evie Ladin Band, a couple solo albums, and has numerous credits as a sidewoman. She has performed all over the world, and for those of you old enough to remember the show, she has even appeared on the legendary radio program A Prairie Home Companion.
Evie is a passionate educator with a full teaching schedule at camps and festivals throughout North America. In addition to performing and teaching, she is also the executive director of the International Body Music Festival, which will be hosted in Athens, Greece this November.
We talk about folk traditions, education, the ties between music and dance, and its importance to culture and the human experience, and her all-woman percussive dance a cappella choir, Motor Dance.
Please welcome to the podcast, Evie Ladin. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Some of the questions we like to ask our guests when they come on is what brought you to this art form, to the art form that you participate in?
Ooh, I feel like I've always been a part of it. My mom was an international folk dance leader in New York City. And so she was always leading groups. And, you know, that's a lot of Eastern European dances and odd time signatures and group social dance. And my dad fell in love with folk music and specifically Southern Appalachian folk music. He went to Hootenanny Carnegie Hall in 1958. So both my parents were born and raised in New York City, but he really fell in love with Southern Appalachian music. And it was during, you know, the first folk scare when musicians and dancers, cloggers from the South would be traveling through, and they stayed with us in our house. And so I remember my sister and I standing behind my mom at a clogging workshop when I was about 5. And we just started, you know, dancing and emulating it and loving it. And we're very firmly Gen X. So there were like no other kids around when we were around all these hippie cloggers. Yeah. And so they would come and stay with us, or my dad would pack us up and go to music festivals, like the earliest folk festivals, where there's a lot of freedom to run around. But my sister and I just were really mostly first grabbed by the clogging and the group dancing, square dancing and all of that. So just like music and dance was in our family culture, even though nobody played an instrument. My sister and I both do.
So the dance came first. When did you start playing the banjo or the guitar?
No, I started with banjo for a long time. Okay. And there's an early group called the New Lost City Ramblers, who were a bunch of Northerners who really studied and promoted a lot of the Southern music and Appalachian music, and they traveled a lot and kind of spread the gospel of that music all over. And John Cohen, who's in that group and also a fabulous photographer, and documented a lot of that era. He was staying with us at the time in New Jersey, and he said, "You girls should play the banjo." And then next thing I knew, I had banjo lessons. So I was 8, and
cool.
And my sister was 10, and you know, my mom had sewed us little clogging dresses, and we were performing clogging routines and taking banjo lessons. I don't know. It just sort of like happened. It wasn't something I did by choice.
That's awesome. So you did take like kind of traditional like dance and music lessons then also? Not
really. Okay. I didn't take dance lessons like in any kind of studio or school. Okay. I didn't really have any official kind of dance training until I got to college. Okay. I wasn't in a studio or anything like that. The dancing was all social and workshops at festivals and camps. And it was really like the early days of folk camps and festivals, you know, that are now like all over the place. But we just kind of soaked it up wherever we could. And apparently we were like, teach me, you know. And I did have banjo lessons probably weekly, I'm guessing. I don't really remember. and playing was something I did for fun. And at all these festivals and stuff, there's a lot of jamming. And so I would jam, or even jamming on the dance board. That was a big part of what we did. And social dance was a big part of that.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I mean, now I see how lucky I am that that was my experience, that it wasn't even more formal than that. It really sunk in that this is what people do, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think there's so much that you can learn from learning in that way that is impossible to replicate in like a studio or more traditional, we think of like European style teaching.
It's funny that you say more traditional, because really what's more traditional is people engaging in it all the time, you know, like in their communities, in their cultures.
Right.
It's interesting how it's kind of moved into like very sterile environments, especially things like tap and jazz, and even like folk music has become like you have to go to certain places to learn it, as opposed to like going to the local bar or your neighbor's house or something like that.
I mean, those pockets, those environments, they do exist. And unfortunately, like, you know, sort of in our generalized American culture, people have to find it.
Yeah.
But once you find it, and it's funny because someone on tour said, just had as a group question, like after the concert, what was your aha moment about music? You know, when you knew this is what you wanted to do. And I was like, I don't think I've ever had one. Like, I mean, I had a moment in, you know, my late 20s when I was like, you know, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Oh, I'm already doing it, you know. But that aha moment about music, for a lot of people, it's because they're discovering something they haven't had access to. And I've had access the whole time, and it just was always a very normal part of living. It's kind of an old world social environment. You know, we all crave the opportunity to be together, whether it's camping or a house party or whatever, is like, let's get together and play. That's always the goal. And I definitely have seen the dance side decrease over years. There used to be a lot more people dancing. And I think that was like the moment of discovery. And then people got older and started playing more music instead, or something like that. So there's some of us who like keep, you know, promoting the dance side of it. And of course, the people who participate in are like, wow, I feel so good. Duh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
And even from a physiological point of view, like the way the body feels when you're up and moving and congregating with people who are also up and moving, like how beautiful the community that builds, but also like for our body, it's medicine. I mean, it's medicine, it's religion, it's all of those things. Yeah.
It's definitely chemical in the brain.
For sure. Now, you do teach a lot. How do you take that into your teaching then? Trying to that, you know, because if you're teaching in more kind of like are you teaching in class settings or mostly only at festivals?
Kind of all over the map.
Yeah.
And really in my teaching style, and especially as I've gotten really great feedback from students who have stuck with me for time, is that I take a more traditional approach in that there's a place for everyone to participate. And rather than talking about it, the goal is in the doing. And if you know, see traditional cultures anywhere, you see children, you know, imitating what's going on and participating and like brought into even professional level ensembles as to like come close, be a part of it, you know, just really encouraged to be enmeshed in the process. And adults, especially adults who've grown up without this, and it's something they've always wanted, are so scared of it. And so, like for instance, I have group classes in banjo through the Freight and Salvage in Berkeley, like 6-week sessions, and I'm about to start one tonight.
There you go.
I'm like, oh, it's today. Anyway, but you know, everyone's at a different level. And I'll be like, okay, here's a way to play the tune, just strumming and playing chords. Here's to add more melody. Here's to add more texture. Here's to add some fancy licks. Like basically giving levels so that everyone can be doing it. And I talk a lot about how Western learning is very linear. People feel like they need to know what they're doing before they do it. But traditional learning is more circular. Like, and especially, things will come around again. There's a form and you grab onto the form and, oh, I missed it, but here it is again. And though I caught it that time, but I missed it this time and I caught it the next time. And so it's a way of, as I say, being in tune and in time are non-negotiable. Like time is non-negotiable. So the first thing you want to do is figure out how to play in time or dance in time. And you can do the simple, even when we're doing like body music classes or rhythm classes, it's like you can do something in time, even if it's the simplest thing. But the main thing is to be in time. And then the next time around, you add something else and then you mess it up and who cares? And then you get back on the train, that kind of thing. So my teaching style is really about encouraging participation and doing and the learning through doing and not through talking about it or not through just getting it right or wrong before you have a chance to, enjoy it and get into the groove of it.
Yeah. That's also good.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. Emily and I have both talked a lot about just time and the kind of upside down approach. I think it's upside down. A lot of people take where you get like super crazy high technique, but don't have any concept of good time.
Or musicality.
Exactly.
Groove, that kind of thing.
But also just how you were saying you approach teaching and how traditionally kids would be invited into the circle. I feel like, especially now in our kind of Western, like traditional university track kind of culture, there's such an emphasis on getting everything up to a level just to be able to like enter, just to be able to participate.
Yeah, it's such a shame.
I need all of these things. I need to learn giant steps in all 12 keys even before I go to the jam session, or I need to learn like all my Bach inventions before I go out and play a show, or any of these things. There's such an emphasis on, if you don't know this like hundreds of years worth of information, then you can't even start, And
are you familiar with Victor Wooten's book, The Music Lesson?
Yeah.
So that book was revelatory to me. I mean, granted, I was fortunate enough to grow up in that kind of environment that he describes, which is like, when you're learning language from the get-go, you're jamming with the masters, he talks about, and he grew up in a musical household. And so just getting in was, easy, is something you participate in. But talking about, music, you could talk about dance, you could talk about any sort of artistic pursuit in this way, but especially music and dance, like being something that you can enjoy and jump into early on. And like each chapter revealed to me something that freed up my musicality, even just like that every wrong note is a half step from a right note. I had no idea that was true. And so once I learned that, like my willingness to improvise just completely opened up, because then if I find myself in a wrong place, I can get myself back to a right place really quickly. And I don't know, I just sort of decided to not worry too much about it and not be afraid of it. I'm still a little shy, and I would be if I was like playing with masters and stuff. But, I know I've got time, and I know I have enough information that I can reach out for things, and if I miss them, what's going to happen? Mortal embarrassment, maybe. But usually but usually nothing. And then you learn.
How do you feel like that applies to your movement and teaching of movement? Obviously, especially with the body percussion and the flat footing, or the time is, again, just that's your ground level, right? So then,
Yeah.
how do you approach your improvisation? Do you do a lot of improvisation with your body percussion and flat footing, or do you tend to be more choreographed when you do that?
Both. I think my ability to improvise in part came from learning a lot of choreography, like on the dance side. And let's see, I feel like, especially with body, like, so sorry, with flat foot clogging, it is an improvisational
Right.
style. And in so much that, and it's interesting because my partner, Keith Terry, started out as a jazz drummer. And when he started playing percussion with old time string band music, he went towards the rhythm section, which is what you do as a drummer in jazz, and in a lot of styles of music, so that would just be like this boom chuck, or boom pa chucka kind of thing. And then I thought, the dancers are more dancing the melody, and they're paying more attention to the melody. And when he started playing like that, he sounded like a clogger. And
Interesting.
for whatever reason, I mean, some of the old folks have like their step, their little pattern that they just do over and over again to anything. But a lot of us who, so the goal from the get-go is not necessarily just holding down the rhythm section of the music, but playing along with the melody with your feet.
Cool.
And so exploring a lot of those ideas. I will say my early forays into rhythmic improvisation were not super supportive. It was more like, if I got off or something, it was like, wrong, no. And it made me very shy about stepping out.
Interesting.
But later on, being in environments where people were jamming or playing, and then, to be honest, the last decade plus of doing my own rhythmic exploration that kind of led to my work with motor dance. Really specifically, like, here's an example. I really didn't understand. I couldn't feel in so much African diaspora music, it's like 6/4, like you can feel it in 6, you can feel it in 4, or you have these two rhythms, operating polyrhythmically with each other. And we were doing something in our company, that it was in 4, and then we were moved to 6, and I wasn't feeling it really naturally. Especially for whatever reason, it's easier to feel it in 6 and harder to then transfer and go back to feeling in 4. So as I want to do when there's something I want to learn, I will teach it in a class.
Yeah.
Because I stay one step. I know I'm a good teacher because then I break it down and I practice it with people. And I just stay one step ahead. And so I did this whole exercise of doing, hands and feet 3/2 and switching it 2/3, just back and forth and really feeling it, and then building things on top of it, like a bell pattern, really exploring some African diaspora polyrhythms on the body and breaking it down that way until I really embodied it. And in motor, what I do is I do that kind of thing and then explore it choreographically and create arrangements and layer song on top and all of that kind of stuff. But I find the process of doing that work kind of really opened up my ability to improvise. Like, and honestly, just in the last few years, do I feel that freedom. Like I just feel like, if I get off, I can get back on. Like, I'm not scared about it anymore because I feel like I have a deeper, a very embodied understanding of where the rhythm sits. And then I'll also just throw out there those opportunities where, and I try to do this often, where the group is holding a rhythm, and then you have two measures or whatever for a soloist, and then the group comes back in, and then the next person improvises, and the group comes back in. And I always, people always feel terribly on the spot when you do that. And I'm like, you can just keep it the simplest thing, just stay in time and come back in, come in and out, in and out. And like just having that, being able to hit it, feel it in your body. And then also keeping the subdivisions in your body. So like really feeling the space that's not heard, the sound that's not being made, that you feel that in your body. Anyway, I don't know, might have got off topic, but like I do feel like my ability to improvise was hampered by the pressure of being good at it right away. And then continuing to explore on my own, I was able to, or with other people, and then leading it and teaching it, I just felt like I got better and more free.
It's interesting to me because I feel that I, did not come from a improvisatory dance world. I came through a very European studio training, and that was just never something we ever did, even in classes. Whereas now you see it more often in classes. But it's interesting to me that you felt more comfortable or maybe welcomed into improvising on a musical instrument more than you did rhythmically through your body. I wonder.
It might have all happened around the same time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. And it also might have to do with where I'm at in my age and my career, and having a little bit of a like, who cares going for it, like being less attached and having enough experience to not be scared of failing.
Yeah. For sure.
Or just laughing at myself.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, the traditional dance education, is creating these very, what's the word? Very facile musicians, very virtuosic musicians, but not necessarily the most openly creative. And honestly, something that kind of turned me off of the tap world was the emphasis on like fireworks that wasn't really musical, not really connected to the musicality, that there was no space.
Yeah.
And then also, and I know that this is very much part of, the African diaspora tradition of, cutting and the competition of it. And I think coming from definitely a more social inclusiveness, and not that, the competitive aspect is very much a part of African-American traditions in a socially inclusive way. It's just sort of a part of how people learn and progress, and show off and all of that kind of stuff. So not to get down on competitiveness in general, but, like as you're talking about the traditional European way of learning through studios, it's so much about competition, and that people are gearing their creativity towards winning something and instead of just participating in something. And I feel like it really skews your idea of what art and creativity is. And that being said, I'll share that I was in a bad accident when I was 20, when I was a senior in college. I was hit by a car on my bike, and they broke both my tibia and fibula in one of my legs. And because I was on my own, no one was advocating for me. The doctor put my leg together almost an inch short. And so I have like real physical limitations on what like how fast my foot will go. It doesn't reach the floor at the same place.
Jeez.
It affects my spine, all of this kind of stuff. So I've done a lot of adjusting over the years to what I can do. And so obviously that cuts into my ability to be as competitive as possible because I just physically can't do that. But grooving is something I can do, and making space and moving through space and all of that. So I've all along just have really had to adjust my career and my expectations based on my physical limitations. So just to come back to what I was saying, the competitive aspect of tap dancing, it just kind of bummed me out. I would rather be making choreographies. I'd rather have a real close social environment. And I know those two things can exist simultaneously. They just hadn't come together for me.
I can see a similar kind of problem, if you will, in like the classical music worlds,
Sure.
or even in jazz, just in
all of them. Yeah.
Just in the university settings, everyone's told that you have to go to university to get a good education. But once you get to university, you're getting put through these juries where you're being judged on something that, at least a big chunk of it, is very subjective.
Absolutely.
Like how like, obviously, like, they can tell you if you're playing a note wrong, but on top of that, you're just being judged on like your musicality, and you have to get a good grade, you have to do what your professor thinks is good musicality, and your professor might not be a great musician. Like, or have a very limited view of what is good music, and that's always really bothered me.
It's a real, we can get into the colonial structure of it, but it's a real dichotomy between what is celebrated and awarded and all of that versus what is actually fulfilling, and like the purpose of music and dance in the first place is it's what people do, and it's something to enjoy together. Not all of it needs to be commodified.
Yeah.
To enjoy the participation of it. I just am always, I realized years ago that a big part of my career is getting people to participate, facilitating participation, because it makes people feel good. And I feel like that's how I am an activist, because my skills are best utilized at bringing people into that joy and that dopamine hit and the satisfaction and the connectivity and the things that really make us human and connect us to one another. And then they can go out and cure cancer and, fight the legal system and all of that. I do my best. But, at some point during the pandemic, I had a whole bunch of banjo students, and I said, you know what I do? Let's go around the room and what do you all do, when you're not playing banjo? And 201, every single one was like STEM related. And all they wanted to do was play music. And there's a real connection between, STEM, science and math and all of that, and music, as we know, we know music is math and all of that, but it's an expression from the other side of your brain. And it just seems like there's a craving of people who think so logically to have that kind of freedom in music and dance. It shows up more musically, but I'm always encouraging the dance side.
My generation, we were told we could have it all, never grow old, walking in a straight line.
Walking in a straight line.
But now I'm grown, and so I know taking care of business is how it goes, walking in a straight line.
Walking in a straight line. I'm used to it.
Feeling the way I feel.
I'm used to it.
Nothing's gonna change.
I'm used to it.
Feeling the way I feel. I gotta get used to everything being the same.
This is the Relative Rhythms podcast, and you're listening to our conversation with Evie Ladin. This project is a labor of love, and we are currently funded entirely by our listeners. If you'd like to support our work, you can do so by joining our Patreon, where you can find extra content and listen to the full uncut interviews. Go to patreon.com/relative rhythms to subscribe and support our work. You can also support us by following and leaving a review. Thanks for listening, and now back to our conversation with Evie.
I have to say something that I'm always surprised at, that I remain surprised about, is that whenever there's a dancer in any situation, especially a percussive dancer, Irish, tap dance, or clog, you get up and dance and people are like, whoa, and the audience goes crazy and everybody goes nuts. And yet it's like one of the least funded art forms. And like people don't show up for dance in the same way. They're like, I don't know anything about that. And yet when people do those spots, it's just like over the top enthusiasm. So I don't know what that disconnect is in our culture, but we'll just keep showing up and wowing people for those 3 minutes or whatever it is they've got attention for.
Yeah, that's funny. I thought you were going to go a totally different way when you started that thought. Because we actually, one of the things we wanted to talk to you about was this difference and the choice of being, yes, like you said, you want to start from a musical, that time and groove, right? Place when you're dancing, but you can't help but be visual, right? And so when people see that, especially if a dancer is coming up with a jam with a band or something like that, it does have that more like, whoa, they're dancing, And Adam and I always talk about this, like, yeah, but if they're not in time, the audience doesn't necessarily, like, the band can feel that they're like, this is, what are we doing? But it's because it's visual versus just auditory, it gets more of a reaction. And what your thoughts are about that. And also with the movement choir, motor dance, your choices, they're beautifully visual, even when they don't necessarily have to be to serve the music. And what your thoughts are about dance as a visual art form or a like auditory percussive art form. If you had thoughts about that.
For whatever reason, choreography is what goes through my mind. Moving in space. And I did feel motor dance grew out of when Keith and I founded the International Body Music Festival and started collecting this up, creating this as a genre, really. And I give Keith major props because he, coined the term body music for what he does to include all the sounds, melody and harmony, not just percussive sounds. And so all the percussive dance styles are a part of that, but so is choir singing, so is beatboxing. So it's like all this kind of stuff is part of body music. And so in the festival, we would strip down any groups that normally use music or percussion or whatever and say, can you do this just with the sounds of your body? And the tap dancers just in your leather shoes, as you're still using shoes, but like just so that it's not outside the realm of a more acoustic human sound. But I did notice that a lot of the art forms, not all of them, but a lot of the art forms were more musicians putting the sounds on their bodies than dancers moving it. And I wanted to see more choreography and movement. And I don't know if that's through social dancing, square dancing. And I call square dances, which is like large group choreography, seeing the whole group, seeing them move around and when they need to move to the next thing and all that kind of thing. And then when I went to college, I went to Brown University and I had a great mentor in Michelle Bach-Coulibaly. And she combined West African and modern in a beautiful way that felt very like honoring both traditions. And early on, I, sort of realized this deep connection of the African influence in Southern Appalachian music and dance. And so anyway, I was exploring all of this, and through her classes, the choreography classes and stuff, I started exploring a wider movement palette, but still without sacrificing. There was a big rhythmic component. And as you probably know, in modern dance, rhythm can sometimes be like ignored, and even like I did a workshop at a high school once, and at the end of the workshop, asking for feedback, and one of the dancers, was 17. She said, I've been dancing my whole life. My teachers always told me to have rhythm, but they never taught me how. And so there was no like, this is what rhythm is. This is what being rhythmic is. This is here being in the, in the pulse and feeling the pulse and the subdivisions and feeling different time signatures and things like that. So there's that side of it. And then there's the movement side, but also I think coming from like foot percussion dance, where often the upper body is not prescribed and is more pedestrian. And so in as much as I am exploring that and what ways the movement makes me, or the rhythm makes me want to move, or what time I have, when can I turn and still keep time, or how does this make me want to move as I'm exploring these different rhythm patterns. It's complex. And I guess what I'm getting at is that I have some real specifics, but it's not 100% specific. It's not uniform. I want to see the personalities of the people dancing. And it's remarked upon a lot that my company is diverse in size and shape and ethnicity and age and all of that, because honestly, it just draws people who are really turned on by this weird thing. By not only wanting to, really getting how satisfying it is to have this percussive and very rhythmic movement, but also moving in space and also holding harmonies and the arrangement. And I've been very clear that it's like, again, these things are non-negotiable. It can't be out of tune and it can't be out of time. It has to be 100% specific. Now I want you to move and express it in these ways, and because people are different shapes and sizes, the way that their arms flow and whatever, and what their training is, they're all going to be different. And so I love that, having moments of like total clarity and moments of, a differentiated expression.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the question.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
100%, yeah.
Can we, so this is your motor dance company. Can we just listen to one of the tracks real quick?
Sure.
Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. When I hear that trumpet sound, gonna get up out of the ground. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Look way over yonder. What do you think I see? I see a band of angels coming after me. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. When I hear that trumpet sound, get up out of the ground. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Look, go yonder, Gabriel. Put your feet on the land and the sea. Don't you blow your trumpet till you hear from me. Meet me, oh, meet me Going down to the river of Jordan, gonna bury my knees in the sand. Holla, high, Hosanna, till I reach that promised land. Meet me, oh, meet me in the middle of the air. If my wings should fail me, won't be another pair. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. When I hear that trumpet sound, get up out of the ground. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body. Do that, don't, do that, do that, do that, don't.
Yeah.
No grave.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how you said it so many times in our chat today about space. And I feel like that's so well shown in this audio and also in the video that you guys have of it. It's the space is what you're attracted to, right? All the sound and the space, the like it's just I love it. I love it.
Yeah, really powerful.
I love it.
Also, what really surprises me about this is just the high level of musicianship in your company. Like everyone's singing and it sounds really good. And on top of that, being really
time.
great in time. Yeah, really great
In tune and in time.
dancers and body percussionists. Like these kind of worlds seem usually very separate. Like you can be a really good tap dancer or a really good body percussionist, and it doesn't often translate to also being a really good musician. Or you can be a really good musician and you would never delve into tap dance or percussive dance or anything like that.
I think there's a shift. Sorry, Evie, we want to hear from you. I think that you mentioned tap, and I think that tap is almost separate from this conversation because it's become so engulfed into the Western European kind of style of training that we have in the States right now. Whereas I think it's not, and let me know what you think about this, Evie. I think it's less uncommon in the dance forms that have kept and stayed in a folk tradition, like your flat footing. And I think that you can find more flat footers and kind of more folk dancers that tend to be more musical. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Or more connected to the music. I
More
mean,
connected,
there are
yeah.
there are tap jams I mean,
for
there are
sure,
lots
yeah.
of tap dancers.
And phenomenally musical tap dancers.
I mean, the early tap dancers, they were musicians also. And the idea is just like putting the music in your body.
Right.
And it's funny when when I advertise for auditions or something like that, I think of this as an unusual skill set. And yet, if you do musical theater, you also sing and dance and do choreography and all of that. It's just a very stylized, very specific style. And I'll say, for a long time as I was workshopping these ideas, there were things I wanted to learn. That Ain't No Grave was the first piece that I made that became motor dance. And it was partly because I wanted to take a set of polyrhythms. This is from Afro-Cuban son, and do one rhythm in my feet, one in my hands, and one in my voice, and then switch it, and then switch it, and switch it. And then the way each of those things moved was really different. And then it's funny because I'm teaching this piece to my company right now. We're revamping it. Cool. And it's 3-2 clave and 2-3 clave sort of intermixed. And I did run it by, some really great Afro-Cuban musicians. I was like, can I do this? And they're like, as long as it's good, as long as you're not messing up clave or being unspecific,
Right.
They're like, nobody does this. Like, this isn't a thing, what you're doing. And so, same thing with a new piece that I've done. The Body Music Festival was in Ghana in 2018, led by Dr. Kofi Bologno, who is from a village in Ghana and teaches up at University of British Columbia.
Oh, wow.
And so he brings music teachers to his village, Orff music educators, to have an immersion experience. So the Body Music Festival was there. It was an incredible experience. And we learned some of the music. And I came home and I was like, okay, I could play my part, but I didn't really understand how all the parts fit together. And so I slowed it way down. And this is not how they learn there, in their tradition. But I slowed it way down and I pulled it apart and explored it in the same way. Hands, feet, voice, hands, feet, voice, switch, 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 switch. And again, this 3/6 against 4, 4 against 6 kind of thing, 3/2, really getting to feel that in the body. And I created a new piece with that. And only just a couple weeks ago, he was in the area. And I said, oh, I have to show you what I did. Like, is this okay? And he was so excited. He was like, what you're doing is amazing. You're taking our traditions and exploring it in this whole new way, but like keeping, the juice of it. And here's something that I thought was really cool is that I'm taking them and exploring them against like 4 in the feet and 6 in the feet and switching back and forth so that you really feel that how you can feel it in 4 and feel it in 6. And he said, in that music, there is no pulse in the music. They're all polyrhythms and the pulse is in the dancer's feet. And he said, so what I did was sort of like combine all of those ideas into this weird expression that I have. But he was 100% behind it. And so to get the affirmation that what I'm doing is not just cool and it's not appropriation. It's exploring it in a new direction that the originators of it are, it makes them excited because you're doing something cool and new with a very old form. And so that's really important to me because, appropriation and colonization, all that kind of stuff. Like I have been talking about that since I was a teenager, and thankfully now most people are starting to know that the banjo is an African instrument. Right. And, especially now that Rhiannon's banjo playing is in Beyonce's new song, all these people are like, oh, Black people are always a part of country music. And I'm like, thank you. It's been like decades of us having this conversation within the genre. And like, now it's kind of blown wide open. But it's funny because I'm teaching that Ain't No Grave right now to my ensemble. And what I started saying earlier is that this exploration grew into this piece and eventually, and I brought in people anyone who was attracted to learning it, attracted to learning it and being specific. And it's, it would be some dancers, some singers, some musicians. I had a professional hooper, just like people who really came from different avenues of exploration, but wanted to do it. And then actually in January of 2020, I had auditions because I was like, I think I have enough people that I can cull it down to the people who can really hold a harmony part, really understand the arrangement, and do the choreography. And that was the trickiest part, because there were a number of singers who, once they turned the corner, they didn't know where they were again. They'd had to like relearn it all over again. And then by contrast, even up to our last performance of our most recent show, someone in a jam class that we were doing had asked the question, how do you put your foot down? Because she had come from doing modern and African styles, and like the subtlety in the way you put your foot down.
Oh, yeah.
I had not even thought of how to say that to my dancers. And I went back to my company and I was like, when we're doing this, you want to drop into your rhythm. Like you're not, because some of them are modern dancers and they're like putting their feet down very carefully or whatever. And I'm like, no, on the beat. Like there's no negotiation. There's no moving through it. It is like you're dropping your rhythm down into it. And even coming up to the last performance, they were like, oh, so useful. Like I really feel it now. And it's like, who knew what part was missing? Because there's so many elements going on.
Right.
And I share this all the time, that in a tap class with Brenda Buffalino years ago, she was like, it all comes from your ass.
I can see her saying that. I can, yeah.
And she was talking about doing like a crawl, with your feet. And when she told me that, I was like, oh my God, right? It's from your core, from your center, all of your extremities acting from your center. And so anytime, the subdivisions, I say that all the time, feel it in your ass, like you're feeling it, feeling this pulse, feeling the subdivisions in your body, in your core, in your gut, wherever you are. But also when you're using those big muscles, then your extremities can flow more. That's how we teach shuffles, is like throwing it out there. It's not from the foot,
loose. Right.
It's from your hip or whatever, throwing it out there.
Interesting.
So I thought about that a lot when people are talking about how do you put your foot down? It's like drop into it.
That's awesome.
Detail.
Yeah.
You were talking about a lot of pretty complicated stuff, theoretically speaking, like doing the polyrhythms, the 3 against 2, the 6 against 4, things like that. Are you trying to teach the kind of theory when you're teaching your company or teaching your classes at festivals or whatever? Are you explaining what is happening theoretically, or is it just like teaching movement? Like, how do you combine the two?
I mean, 3/2 is a hemiola. It's been defined as a hemiola, and it's a device that is used a lot.
Right.
So I might mention that. I can't say I really come from a very theoretical perspective, although having grown up not having that information, because I actually started, playing clarinet in 3rd grade.
You're a clarinet player.
There you go.
No, I am not a clarinet player.
Let's jam.
No, I started playing clarinet in 3rd grade when there was music education in public school. And we moved when I entered 6th grade, and the band director didn't let me in the band because I didn't already know things that he should have taught me.
Right.
And I realized years later, that I could look at the page and play the note. I could hear it and play the note. I could look at the page and tell you what the note was. But what he said was, play me a C. And I was like, what does it look like? Or what does it sound like?
Right.
I mean, I was 11,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I just froze. And
Right.
because I didn't immediately know that note on my instrument, he didn't let me in the band. And honestly, that was the end of my official music education.
Wow.
And my adult life as a professional musician,
Right.
I have been always trying to catch up. And like I said, staying one step ahead. And the cool thing, I think, is that I understand the not knowing. And I understand that music and dance, like, it enters into you through a lot of different portals. And in my music teaching, I think a lot about the knowledge, the patterning, and the ear, and this like triangle that you're connecting, but then eventually you don't want to be thinking about the thing. You want to just be doing it. And honestly, in the pandemic, I had a huge breakthrough with my understanding of music and the system. Like, I just had never fully understood the system of music and how simple the system is, even though it has infinite applications. And so, especially teaching adults who are usually very scared and feel like they can't do anything until they've got it right. I really, I'll say, just play along, just do this. Don't think too much about it. And I was like, okay. And now we're going to look at the theory. I even hate saying theory. Here's the system, how we're going to use it on the banjo, because we can just use these parts of it. And if you get the idea, even just like notes being attached to numbers, which comes up all the time, whether it's notes or chords or scales or whatever. And I was like, just having that idea and continuing to reinforce it in a really small way. I see people have this aha moment of like, okay, I just keep reinforcing the same in small chunks, and I feel like so much music teaching, at least in folk music, is like, put your fingers here, put your fingers there. And I'm like, but why? How do you know? And I had a student even once tell me that how far you moved to go from chord to chord was random. There was no way to know. And I was like, there's definitely a way to know. Like, it is, it's set, it's a system, you know? That being said, in my dancing, I don't talk a lot about that, about the theoretical ideas. I'll talk about, rhythmic structure and things like that.
I think it's interesting because, originally all music and dance and poetry and spoken word, it was all oral tradition. It was all passed down as you learned through that kind of folkloric tradition, right? Like, you learned in community, and that's how music and dance was learned in community, the kids being involved and welcomed into the circle, as you said. And we've lost that, and we've elevated the need or knowledge for theory. Whereas even up until like the 30s and 40s, some of the incredible musicians didn't know how to read music.
Totally. I don't read music.
Oh, you don't at all?
I mean, I know the idea.
Okay.
But I have never had to use it.
Oh, interesting.
Enough to really translate it to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've some of my dancers who are more avid musicians have scored out my stuff because that's how they need to understand it.
Yeah.
The ones that were more musicians, one of them was like, why don't you just write it all out and then teach it to us, instead of like the discovery, which all the dancers are like, no, it happens in discovery. Or even like she was saying, you keep changing it. And the dancers are like, yes. It changes. Even like you perform it, it changes. You perform it, it changes. Like, because it's you're creating physically. You're not creating just mentally. And the physical act of creation, like I can create all I want in my mind, but then people will be like, this isn't physically possible. Dancers experience that all the time. Be like, okay, well, let's change it so it makes sense, physically for us. So it's been fascinating to see the difference of how musicians and dancers, because of the kind of training of Western training they've have a disassociation of certain aspects of putting it together. And God, I feel so fortunate, and also fortunate that I'm able to bring people into this experience as much as possible, even with square dancing. Like, over and over again, people have suffered this trauma of doing it in elementary school because, again, it's been regulated and taught in a way that makes it so much less fun. But in its natural habitat, as one recent college student was like, I feel giddy. And I was like, yeah, you do. That's what, like, this freedom of doing it. Everyone's having a great time. It doesn't matter if they mess up and all that kind of stuff. Social enjoyment. of music and dance. I mean, it's the thing that makes us the most human.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us, and especially now in the internet age or technological age, whatever, as we keep going farther down this rabbit hole, people crave it.
Mm-hmm.
They crave a human connection. They crave a connection to their physical bodies. And I hope to keep, I love performing, but I also know in my performances, it's something that brings people into the experience. And I want to engage people into feeling like this can be yours. You can be a part of this, and you should be, because it is a dopamine hit like no other.
Yeah.
This is great. Evie, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for hosting and being so enamored of the dance style.
You've been listening to our conversation with Evie Ladin. Learn more about Evie, her teaching schedule, and her music on her website, evieladin.com, and follow her on all the socials at Evie Ladin.
And don't forget to check out her incredible catalog of original and traditional music, available on all the streaming platforms.
If you'd like to support our podcast, you can do so at our Patreon, where you can find uncut episodes and extra content. And you can also find us on all the socials at Relative Rhythms.
Please follow, rate, and leave a review wherever you are listening, and share this episode with a friend.
Our opening theme song, For the Love of It, was composed by Adam. The mid-roll music today was Evie's song, Walking in a Straight Line, off her band's album, Jump the Fire. The closing music is Polly Put a Kettle On, Lonesome John, off her band's album, Playing Our Hand. During the show, we also listened to her motor dance company performing Ain't No Grave.
Thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you next episode. We'll leave you in the capable hands
And feet
of Evie Ladin.
Where'd you get them high-heeled shoes, that dress that you got on? Got my shoes from a railroad man and my dress from Lonesome John. Where were you when the train left town? Where were you last Sunday? I was out with Lonesome John and I didn't get back till Monday. Lonesome John is not your man. Lonesome John is ragged. Sleeps with his head in the yoke bin and he carries a rusty dagger. Don't you go with railroad men, they'll never treat you proper. Choose a girl in every town and underwear they'll drop her. You take back my heel, choose that dress that you got on. Quit your mind